We're picking up on 1500 or just about there. But I'm going to back up for just a moment. I don't know if it comes up somewhere here in a moment. We're going to back to this in a second. At line 739, lines 159, 433, 556, 732, and a few times later on in the poem, I think that's at 893. 893 or 839? Yeah, 893. And then later on also with the dragon, the poet uses the word aglaka, or the same term with a different kind of inflectional ending. Aglakan, aglakes. The S indicates possession. The AN indicates plurality. Okay, this is singular, and this is a nominative subject, if I remember correctly. And the only reason I'm talking about this is because it's a very interesting word. It no longer survives in modern English, and because it has a variety of interpretations or translations. Okay? It can mean warrior, fierce combatant, terrible one. Your gloss at 739 means awesome one or terror, etc., is elsewhere applied to the dragon slaying Siegmund, to Beowulf himself. It's also applied to the dragon. It's applied to Grendel. It's applied to Grendel's mother. Okay? How do you translate it?
Because warrior and monster mean very different things.
Warrior and monster can be entirely different things. Now, terrible one and monster, those go along. Fierce combatant and monster, yeah, those can kind of go along. Interesting, there is a scholar named, I think her name was, or is, I don't think she's still alive, Josephine Bloomfield, I believe, who wrote a couple of articles about one of Beowulf's 20th century editors, a guy named Kleber. You don't need to know his name. Friedrich Kleber did the text that I studied Beowulf from as a graduate student. And one of the things she discusses in those two articles is Kleber's kind of editorial choices. Not editorial in the sense of how he edits the text, but editorial in the sense of how he creates his glossary. Because every good edition of Beowulf, where you read the poem in the Old English, will have a glossary of Old English terms with a modern English translations. Okay, and she kind of picks at that, and I think very rightly so, because what Kleber does is every time, and pretty much every editor after him does this. Every time Aglaka refers to Grendel, Grendel's mother, or the dragon, it gets glossed as monster. When it refers to Beowulf, it gets glossed as warrior, or a fierce combatant, or the awesome one, or the terrible one. And in one instance in Kleber, when it is used to refer to Beowulf and the dragon simultaneously, if I remember correctly, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, Kleber gives warrior for Beowulf, monster for dragon. And yet it's one word to refer to both of them. I think that's in his notes. Okay? Why? What is the editor revealing there? Same kind of way Liuza reveals something in his translation and in his footnotes. What is every editor, whether we're talking about a literary editor, a film editor, a news editor, a newspaper editor, what does every one of them do? Okay? They stand between you and what is in front of them. That is, they mediate. Okay? It's pretty important to always keep that in mind. This is why, when I would teach the Old English and Beowulf sequence at the graduate level, I try to drill this into students. It's that same thing that Bede talks about. Okay? With the translation, you get the gist. You want to really, truly understand what the poet is speaking about, or what a native speaker in another language is speaking about. What? Learn the language. It's only by learning the language itself that you really get into that mindset. Okay? So, we're going to see this term come up later. Now, go back for a moment to 1495. It was Huil Dias, which Liusa translates the space of a day, and he gives a footnote. Okay? Or it was daylight before he could perceive the bottom. Okay, think of the footnote gloss. It was daylight before he could perceive the bottom. Does that make any sense? That makes absolutely no sense. None. Lewis is one of the best I think he is the best translator of Beowulf. I think his translation, in terms of accuracy, is absolutely the best. It is head and shoulders above Seamus Heaney's. Seamus Heaney's is fun to read because Heaney kind of gets the spark, so to speak, the verve, if you want. It's not accurate at all. Well, I'll take that back. It's mostly accurate, but he takes some liberties. He actually uses a word in his translation of Beowulf. He says somebody, Tholed, Tholed. How many of you are familiar with that word? Yeah, none of you are. Why? Because it's not a word in the modern English language. Outside of Belfast, Ireland, which is where Seamus Heaney was raised. It is only used there. Interestingly, it derives from the Old English Tholian or Tholian, and it is the exact word that is used in the poem. Okay? So, in one sense, yes, that's accurate, but in another sense, it's totally useless for a modern audience unless you're one of the few 100,000 people who live in Belfast. Okay? Huil Dias. A while, that's the word from which we get while. What does while mean? Like, meanwhile, back at the top of the lake, a span of time. Is a span of time generally 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes? No, it's a long span of time. Hours? Yes. Okay? So, I usually translate this, or suggest, it was the greater part of a day. Because that's what's being implied. Before he could perceive the bottom. What are we being told? Beowulf isn't like us. Okay? So, he gets to the bottom, and we're told, right away, she who held that expanse of water, bloodthirsty and fierce, notice, she, for 100 half years. So 100 half years is how many years? 50 years. Where else have we heard 50? We haven't yet. Shortly, very shortly, Hrothgar is going to tell a story. Hrothgar is going to give a homily, a sermon, essentially. And he's going to talk about a guy who rules for 50 years. And then later on, last third of the poem, Beowulf is going to rule for 50 years. So there's this weird thing about ruling for 50 years. We're not told about anybody else in the poem who rules for 50 years. But it's interesting that Hrothgar does, Beowulf does, and Grendel's mother held That is a word that does mean, the Old English word that's used there is a word that does mean ruled. She ruled what? Her own little kingdom. Okay? For 100 years. Grim and greedy, perceived that some man was exploring from above that alien land. He hits the water, and it's like sonar goes off, and she's aware. Okay? She snatched at him, seized the warrior in her savage clutches, etc., etc. His coat of mail protects him. Okay? And then we get that she-wolf, and it's literally 1506. Yeah, it's brimwolf. Brim means sea, not she. That sea wolf. But it's got a feminine ending. So we know it's referring to a feminine character. Okay? So that she, sea wolf, whatever a sea wolf is, of the sea, swam to the bottom, bore the Prince of Rings into her abode so that he might not, no matter how strong, wield his weapons. Okay? So she grabs Beowulf and takes him into her abode. I don't remember. 1507. Just curious. To her hova. Anybody know what word we get from that? Listen to its pronunciation. Hova. Add one letter or sound, and what do you get? Into her hovel. Hovel. All right? So, while she's doing that, notice sea beasts are coming at him and such. Then the Earl, that's Beowulf, perceived he's in some sort of battle hall where no water could harm him in any way. So he jumps down through the lake, through the top of the water, gets down to the bottom, she grabs him, she takes him into some kind of underground, underwater cavern. We're not told how this thing doesn't have any air in it. Doesn't have water in it. Okay? Where no water could harm him in any way, and he can't see the top of the roof. He does see a firelight, a glowing blaze shining brightly. Okay? And then he sees her again, the water witch, the great mere wife. Wife there means what? Is she married to the mere? It means woman. That's all the word means. It doesn't mean married woman. So you will see in Old English the word wife. Sometimes you see wifman. And that one probably, I'm not saying it necessarily does, might be making specific a female human, okay, as opposed to just wif, woman. Kind of sounds the same, but work with me, okay? Why does she have a fire?
Is that relating to the Visio of St. Paul, like entrance to hell type of situation?
No, because that's the description at the top of the mirror, okay, where you have the cliff overhanging the waters. It's got trees, they're dead, they're all covered over with ice or frost, what's called hoarfrost, and the water is welling up, and it's got monsters in it, sea snakes kind of a thing. Why would you have a fire in your home? Because it's your home to make it warm. What are we being presented with here? Beowulf's going to kill her in a minute, and then he's going to take a look around, and he's going to see stuff. It's almost like the poet is domesticating Grendel's mother, or making Grendel's mother a domestic. Not a domestic in the sense of like a maid or servant, but someone who has a home and she keeps it nice. She has a little fire in the hearth to welcome you in, So, the worthy man sees her. He gives a mighty blow with his battle sword. Whose sword is this? Unferth's, the kinslayer's sword. He did not temper that stroke. What does that mean? That he didn't temper it. He doesn't hold back. He's going for outside the stadium. I mean, he's swinging that sucker so that the ring-etched blade rang out on her head. And that's probably talking about some kind of carving impression in the blade itself. Rang out on her head a greedy battle song. Notice what he goes for. Why go for the head?
Easiest. You're dead.
Possibly easiest. One swing, and she's dead. Take out the knees first, and then you can, Later on, again, since the poet doesn't care about suspense, I'm not going to care about it either. When Beowulf fights the dragon, he goes for the head first. Fatal move. The guest discovered then that the battle flame, that's a kenning for sword. How in the world does a sword, how do you get flames from a sword? This isn't like Tolkien's Anduril, where Aragorn holds it up and it looks like a flame. What happens if you strike two pieces of steel against each other? They spark. Battle flame. Okay? It wouldn't bite or wound her fatally, but the edge failed the man in his need. It had endured many hand-to-hand meetings, often sheared through helmets, etc., etc. It was the first time that the fame of that precious treasure had failed. The poet's telling us this is an heirloom blade. It doesn't fail because it's old. It's never failed before. So why does it fail here? Does she have a spell woven about her that stops her from being killed by a blade? Nope, because another one's going to kill her in a minute. Is it something to do with Unferth and the kinslaying? We don't know. We don't know. Again, he was stalwart, mindful of glory. He throws away that blade, wrapped and ornamented so that it lay on the earth's strong steel edge. Notice, are we told that the blade shatters? No. Later on, when Beowulf fights the dragon, he hits the dragon with his sword, and his blade goes, it just breaks into pieces. He trusted his strength, the might of his hand grip. And again, where does he get that from? God. As a man should do, if by his warfare he thinks to win long-lasting praise, he cares nothing for his life. What does that mean, he cares nothing for his life?
I'm gonna kill her or die trying.
Oh, hell. I'm just going to go for it. That's kind of it. In one sense, this is almost like he enters, I had written up here the other day, last week sometime, Berserker. It's almost like he's like, nothing gained, nothing lost. Nothing challenged, nothing lost. Okay? The man of the Wargeats grabbed her by the shoulder. He had no regret for that feud. Battle hardened and rage, he swung her around his deadly foe. So she falls to the ground. But she turns the tables. She gave him requital for that. She grappled him to her. Weary, he stumbled, strongest of warriors, of foot soldiers, and took a fall. 1543 or so. Overworked, thought weary mode. She overthrew the one weary in mind. Weak and the strongest of warriors. Feather Chempa, foot feather Chempa, we're told, that he on filla worth, that he fell down, or he became fallen. Okay? Offset Thasona Seligist. Offset Thasona Seligist. She set upon her haldgest. It's not what offset means. Okay? The Thona Seligest, Sella is hall, like Sella's hall, I won't go into it more. Guest, okay? But offset. O-F-F-S-E-T. S-T. Lisa translates as set on. What does that mean? Translate set on. She set upon, he translates. She set upon her hall guest. What does that sound like? What's happening? She approached, she attacked him. I mean, both of those imply she goes towards him, right? No.
Does it mean she sat on him?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So Beowulf throws her to the ground. So now we have a wrestling match. She flips him, throws him to the ground, and then it's humorous, or it should be. And she does what? She plops her butt down on him. So Beowulf's pinned to the ground now. All right? And what does she do? She draws her knife. So she carries a knife with her somewhere. She had to draw it from something. She has a sheath of sorts somewhere. Okay? She's sitting on him, pulls the knife out to do what? Since she's got a pin, and goes all psycho, on him. Film, not crazy. She drew her knife, broad, bright edge. She would avenge her boy. It can't be boy. It's got to be Knecht. It's 1546. Nope, Bairn. She will avenge her bairn, which is where the B-E-A-R-N, which is where the Scots get Wheel Bairn, B-A-I-R-N. Okay? Her only offspring. But what protects him? His chainmail made by Wayland the Smith. It defended his life. And we're told there the son of Ecgtheow would have ended his life under the wide ground. The Gatish champion had not his armored shirt offered him help, the hard battle net, and it's not just the shirt that protects him. It's also God. And holy God brought about war victory, the wise Lord. Ruler of the heavens decided it rightly, easily, once he stood up again. The word that gets translated once, 1556. This thing shows up a lot of times. I can never remember which of these comes first. Sithon. The easiest translation is since. But it can also mean because. It can also mean once. Notice those are three very different meanings. Okay? So, look at those last 3.5 lines. Holy God brought about the war victory, the wise Lord, ruler of the heavens, decided it rightly, easily, something, he stood up. Because he stood up? What does that imply?
It implies that Beowulf standing up is proof that God is with him.
Bingo. Okay. What if it's since he stood up? Kind of the same. Once he stood up implies
God wasn't with him until he did.
until he stands. And then God goes, oh, there's Beowulf fighting a monster. I better give him some help. Again, stupid little adverb that carries an awful lot of meaning. How you translate stupid little adverbs and prepositions when they show up, because usually datives and accusatives, okay, get carried by the inflections rather than separate prepositions to, for, from, with, etc. So the poet tells us Beowulf survives because of two things: coat of mail and God. He saw among the armor a victorious blade. So she has armor laying, whatever this room is, there's armor in the room. A victorious blade, ancient giant sword, and that means a sword made by giants. It's not necessarily referring to, a sword the width of this back wall or the width of one of these boards. It might mean that. I mean, if we're talking about giants, you wouldn't expect a giant to have a 3-foot sword. You'd expect a giant to have a much longer sword. It was the best of weapons, except that it was greater than any other man might even bear into the play of battle. Good, adorned, again, the work of giants, into your work. Okay? So we're told of human beings, who's the only one who could wield this sword? Beowulf. He's 30. So whether it's really long, at the very least, it's really heavy. What is this an example of, possibly? Again, God looking out for him. Because lo and behold, he opens his eyes and there's this sword. Okay? So, what are we told? Where is the sword? There it is. He seizes its hilt, 1563 and such, 1572 and 73. He looked around the chamber, passed by the wall, hefted the weapon, hard by its hilt, the thane of Helike, angry and resolute. He quickly wished to pay back Grendel, etc., etc. Where did he get the weapon from? It's on the wall. Okay. Go back a little bit. Where was it? Nope, that's too far. Yeah, no, I turned my page in. So he sees the weapon. He seizes its linked hilt, fierce and ferocious. He draws the ring-marked sword, despairing of his life, struck in fury so that it caught her hard in the neck, cuts her head off. Flames gleam. So she's killed, and the flames like magically, woof, get really big, and then kind of die back down. A light glowed within, even as from heaven the firmament's candle shines clearly. That's the poet kind of giving us an indication, he's been favored. Now he can see clearly. He looks around the chamber, passes by the wall, hefted the weapon hard by its hilt, that thane of Helike, angry and resolute. Nor was the edge useless to that warrior, but he quickly wished to pay back Grendel. Okay? So he goes and finds Grendel. Goes into another room. He paid him back for that, 1584. He sees Grendel on a couch. What is the literal word for couch there? 1585. It's just in rest. On resta. He sees Grendel at rest, if you want. Okay? And he does what? Chops his head off, and his body bursts. Why? Bloating from being dead. So, everywhere. Soon the wise troops saw it. Saw what? You have to go down 2 lines. All turbid were the waves, and troubled the sea stained with blood. As soon, seemingly, as Beowulf chops off Grendel's head, the water starts bubbling again and blood comes up. And what do they think? 1594. The gray-bearded elders spoke together about the good one, said they did not expect that nobleman would return to seek the mighty prince. It seemed the sea wolf had destroyed him. So what do they think? Beowulf's dead. Okay? Look at the next half line. 1600. The night hour came. The Old English is tha com non dies. Then came 9 of the day. Okay? Talking about reckoning of time. The 9th hour. Ring any bells? Gospels. What happens at the 9th hour? It's crucifixion. Crucifixion begins at the 6th hour.
He dies 3 hours later.
He dies at the 9th hour. It's done. Into thy hands, Father, I commend my spirit. The heavens darken, the whole 9 yards. Okay? That is a biblical illusion. ALLUSION, not I. I once had a student write about biblical ILLUSI. Whole paper was about biblical illusions. And I was like, you're using this word wrongly. Quote Princess Bride. This word does not mean what you think it means. So if it's a biblical illusion, what's it to? Or what is Beowulf being, a character, being alluded to, likened to? Jesus. Okay? What did everybody think, believe, according to the Gospels, at the crucifixion? Dead. Go back to the dream of the rood. Dead, dead. Okay? The noble Scyldings abandoned the headland, and home went the gold friend of men. We're told after the crucifixion, everybody departed. Except for off at a distance were the disciples looking. Why weren't they right up close and personal? Scared. One was John. The guests sat sick at heart. Who are the guests? His men, the Geats. Why? Why are they sick at heart? He's dead. Okay? Go back and read the Gospels. And as they make their way to Jerusalem, Jesus has been telling them for a while now, the Son of Man must be delivered up into the hands of enemies, blah, blah, has got to die, 3 days, I will rebuild the temple, etc. One of the disciples says, we may as well go with him because we're all going to die anyways. That disciple is Thomas, who's also called the doubter. Why? Because after the resurrection, Jesus appears to the disciples, except Thomas isn't there that day, and they tell Thomas, and he says, unless I see the wound in his hand, put my finger in the wound and my hand in his side, I will not believe. And a week later, Jesus shows up and taps him on the shoulder. Okay? So,
Jesus is so sensitive.
he's very down to earth,
I love that.
So they sit there sick at heart. They stare into the mirror. They wish but did not hope that they would see their Lord himself. Why, in that biblical account that I just alluded to, why are all the disciples, except for Thomas, gathered together in the upstairs room? Same place where they held the Passover. Because they're afraid. They know the Pharisees are gunning for them. Okay? These guys are afraid. Meanwhile, back down at the bottom of the lake, then the sword began that blade to dissolve away in battle icicles from the war blood. It melts just like ice when the Father loosens the frost fetters, unwraps the water's bonds. He wields, this is God, he wields power over times and seasons. That is the true maker. Okay? So Beowulf holds onto the hilt, we're told. He doesn't take any other treasure, though he saw many. And the head, he grabs Grendel's head and the sword hilt. Okay? And then he swims up through the lake. I like this. Dove up through the water. Diving usually implies you go down. Okay? The defender of seafarers came to land, swam stout-hearted. He rejoiced in his sea booty, the great burden. His troop of thanes go towards him. They thank God, etc. They rejoiced in the prince. Beowulf takes off his armor, and they start making their way towards Heorot. Okay? Who carries Grendel's head?
Some of his men, I thought.
We're told 4 men. It takes 4 men to carry his head. Okay? How do they carry it? With great trouble. 1636, even for 2 pairs of stout-hearted men, 4 of them had to bear with some strain on a battle pole Grendel's head. How do they bear it? How do they carry it on a battle pole? And does that mean one pole, and like one guy here, hands down, trying to balance this thing as they walk? No, probably not. Could be like that, like carrying a casket. The head is between poles, and you got 2 guys here carrying it like this. Or another way is each of them has a spear jammed up through the neck into the head. So one here, spears up, keeps it nice and balanced. And they make their way to Heorot. And there, where men were drinking, I mean, they're Danes, they're Schildings, we know they love nothing more, apparently, than drinking. Beowulf's men do what? They put the head on the ground, and they drag it by its hair. So Grendel has hair. They drag it by its hair. So the hair is up here, they drag it. So what's dragging on the stone-flagged floor? The stump of the neck. And what's happening to the nice, clean, stone-flagged floor? They hit a cobble, boom, and a bit of stuff oozes out. A grisly spectacle for the man and the queen. And Beowulf then speaks. Look, son of Halfdane, we brought you notice, we brought you gladly these gifts from the sea, which you gaze on here, a token of glory. Not easily did I escape, okay? The battle would have been over at once had God not guarded me. Nor could I achieve anything at that battle with Hrunting. In other words, nice sword, Unferth, but it didn't help me. Though that weapon is good, the ruler of mankind granted to me that I might, and here we hear it, that I might see on the wall a gigantic old sword, hanging, glittering. He has always guided the friendless one, so I drew that weapon. Why does she have a giant sword hanging on the wall? Is this like, I won't use an spurt. Yeah, what the hell? Go walk in some redneck's house, whatever, with a recliner on the front porch and a fridge out there, and there's a big old shotgun hanging over the fireplace. Not knocking shotguns at all, okay? I've got more than one. My daughter used to shoot ski. Is that it? Is it a decoration?
Or is it a remnant of the uprising that the giants supposedly had against God? Did she fight in that?
Could be. We're not told that she's a giant. We're told that she descends from, or at least that Grendel descends from Cain. I think the assumption is she does too. Okay. Nobody's really written about the sword much. I mean, take that back. They've written about the sword in terms of what is on the hilt that we're going to talk about in a moment. They haven't talked about the sword's history, so to speak. See, this is where I think there's a link between this story and why the poet within the world of the poem, or a poet, when they rode back from Grendel's Mere the first time, talked about Siegmund, who found a sword, whose sword was stuck in the wall when he killed the dragon. Is this the same place? We don't know. We don't know how long ago that was. Hundreds, thousands of years, topography changes. What was once a valley or a rift could now be an underwater cave. I just find it very interesting. Okay? So, he says, I brought back the hilt. I avenged the old deeds, the slaughter of Danes, etc., etc. He takes the hilt and he puts it in Hrothgar's hands. That old work of giants again. It came to the keeping of the Danish lord, this is 1680, after the fall of demons, a work of wondersmiths. And when that evil-hearted man, God's adversary, Grendel, gave up the world, guilty of murders, and his mother too, it passed to the possession of the best of world kings between the two seas. Now the poet has just told us, Hrothgar is the best of world kings. Hrothgar spoke. And then for 1685, 1687, until 1700, for 13 lines, he doesn't speak. I mean, you expect when someone says, so-and-so spoke, the next thing is that person speaking. No. Instead, he studies the hilt, where we are told was written or carved. The word actually means inscribed, the word in the Old English. The origin of ancient strife. What is the origin of ancient strife? Is it Adam and Eve? When the flood slew rushing seas, the race of giants, they suffered awfully. What flood? Noah's flood, in which were wiped out the Nephilim, the offspring of the sons of God who went into the daughters of men, the giants. Okay? Or is this the Norse, the Germanic myth of the flood, where frost giants were destroyed? It could be either, it could be both. A last reward the ruler gave them through the raging waters. Also, so somehow on the sword, that story is encapsulated about the flood. Okay? Also, what else? Sat down and said, for whom that sword, the best of irons, had first been made. And for most Old English scholars, they're like, and who? Name the person. This, by the way, very standard. Swords have been discovered as far back as, dating to as far back as about 600-700 AD, all the way up to 1000, 1100. Just about every year now for the past, 6 or 7 years, a Viking sword or a Danish sword dating from around 700 to 1000 AD has been discovered in the high mountains of Norway because of melting ice. During the summers, not during the winters, because there's a lot of ice during the winters. And they almost all have inscribed on them, I was made for. In fact, there's a famous, I think there might be an image of it in your introduction. There's a famous bookmark that was discovered late 19th century called the Alfred Jewel. I don't think it's in your book. Called the Alfred Jewel. It stands about this tall. It's made of gold, and there's a loop at the top, and inside the loop is an image of a face. It's thought to be Alfred's face, made out of glasswork. Okay? And around the outside of it has inscribed in runes, Alfred made me, or Alfred had me made, depending on your translation. It's thought that this is one of the bookmarks that Alfred sent, along with a copy of the Gregory's Pastoral Care that Alfred wrote the preface to, that he sent to bishops. He had several of these made. Okay? One of these jewels, bookmarks, survives. So it's all just to emphasize, pretty standard practice to say what something was made for. And sometimes there are some swords that are actually named. I am called. So, he reads all this, and then he speaks. One may indeed say, if he acts in truth and right for the people, remembers all, old guardian of his homeland, that this earl was born a better man. He uses the comparative. Better implies what? Better than someone. And I think he's better than me. Beowulf is better than me. Beowulf, my friend, your glory is exalted throughout the world. Notice, he's not saying, now that you've killed Grendel and Grendel's mother, it's out there on CNN and TikTok. He's talking about your glory from your previous actions. Everybody's heard of you. You hold it all with patient care and temper, and there's that. Make sure I get them in the right order. Temper strength with wisdom. To use the Latin, fortitudo et sapientiae. You temper. What does it mean to temper something? You strengthen it. You strengthen strength. You mix strength with wisdom. You don't use your strength willy-nilly, indiscriminately. Okay? He goes on. To you I shall fulfill our friendship, as we have said. You shall become a comfort everlasting to your own people and help to our heroes. Yeah, he's not quite so right there. He's not going to be an everlasting solace to his people. He will be a solace for a long time, but not everlasting. Not so, second reference, not so was Hermod. Okay? He grew not for their delight, but for their destruction in the murder of Danish men. What do we find out? Enraged. The Old English there is Gebolgen. Gebolgen. Bolgen is the word from which we get, or related to the word for which we get bellow, as in to yell loudly. He did what? He cut down his table companions, comrades in arms, until he turned away alone from the pleasures of men, that famous prince. Turned away alone from the pleasures of men? It's a nice big long euphemism. He died. Okay? Why did his people betray him into the hands of his enemies? Because he killed his own men while at table. Later on, when Beowulf is dying, he's going to say, "Thank you, Jesus, that I never drunkenly slew my hearth companions." In other words, not like Hermod. He doesn't say Jesus, actually. I'm being facetious. So, the mighty God exalted him in the joys of strength and force. He had this. He had lots of fortitudo, or fortitude, and advanced him far over all men, yet in his heart he nursed a blood-ravenous breast hoard. No rings did he give to the Danes for their honor. So even before he killed his men, he denied what to them? What's the king-thane reciprocal relationship? I fight for you, you give me treasure. They fought for him, he didn't give treasure. How many of you work for free? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. He endured joyless to suffer the pains of that strife, a long-lasting harm to his people. Learn from him. Understand virtue. Well, pause. Time out for a second. Beowulf just won the biggest championship in the world. And what's he being told? Don't let it go to your head. For your sake I am telling this in the wisdom of my winters. So he says, Hermod, he's implying, Hermod started out what? He started out good. But his mind turned blood ravenous. He became full of himself. So, Hrothgar then tells us kind of a little story. You could call it a parable, maybe. It is a wonder to say how mighty God in his great spirit gives out wisdom, land, and lordship to mankind. Notice, it is a wonder, meaning it's a mystery. And it's wonderful when you think about it, how God says, here, you can have, what are the three things? Wisdom, land, and lordship. So, an individual is given these three gifts. Notice, he, God, has control of everything, meaning these three things and everything else. At times, he permits the thoughts of a man in a mighty race to move in delights. That is, to think of delightful things. Gives him to hold in his homeland the sweet joys of earth, the stronghold of men. Grants him such power over his portion of the world. In other words, God at times allows someone to become what? A king. A great kingdom. 1733. That he himself cannot imagine an end to it in his folly. What's the in his folly imply? If he cannot imagine an end to it, what is the king that God has given all this power and authority to thinking?
That it's actually his.
Actually his, what else? He's invincible. Part of my family lives in Oregon. A couple of weeks ago, 4 teenagers killed on a highway. Why? Racing and trying to pass another car. And wham, another car comes, instantly killed. And as my sister, who's married to an ex-cop, said, stupid teenagers, they thought what? As many I've got them, no longer teenagers, but young, often think what? Nothing's going to stop me. Nothing's going to hurt me. I'm going to live to a ripe old age because none of us think we're going to die early or young. Okay? This is in his mind. I've got the kingship. Everything's going great. He's kind of like Oedipus. Okay? He can't imagine an end to it. We're told in his folly. What's another word for folly? What word is related to that?
Mistake.
No, not mistake.
Foolishness.
Foolishness. In his foolishness. Foolishness is what? It's the lack of wisdom. The writer of Proverbs, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. What's the definition of fool? The fool says in his heart, there is no God. Okay? Monotheistic, let's say. Not necessarily Judeo-Christian. He dwells in plenty. That means he's Elon Musk. He's Bill Gates. He's pick your billionaire. Jeff Bezos. He's got everything. What else? In no way plague him illness or old age. He's young and he's healthy. Nor do evil thoughts darken his spirit, nor any strife or sword. Evil thoughts. He doesn't think evilly, is what that means. It's going to be kind of interesting because we're going to see when we get to the end of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, there's going to be a motto that is created in the poem that is the motto for the Knights of the Garter, and it has something to do with evil thoughts. Okay? Or what else can evil thoughts be? About people out there. What are the evil thoughts that Vladimir Putin has? Is it, I'm evil and I'm going to rule the world? Possibly. What are his real evil thoughts? The West, United States, NATO, wants what? They want me dead. True. And what else? I need a buffer. Ukraine's a buffer. He needs more of a buffer. He thinks his evil thoughts are, what are they plotting against me? Okay? This guy doesn't think any of those thoughts. Nor does he have any strife nor of any strife or sword. Why? Think Scyld-Sheving after he arrives and deprives the mead benches. Think Hrothgar when he comes up with the idea of building Heorot. What have they already achieved? Who helps build Heorot? All the neighboring surrounding countries. Why? Because they're scared you-know-whatless. That's why he doesn't think of any strife or sword. This guy's at peace with everybody. Peace isn't the absence of war. He's at peace because they're afraid to start anything. Hate shows itself, but all the world turns to his will. Okay? Everybody kind of, not literally, metaphorically, bows down to this person. He knows nothing worse. So describe this guy's life at this point. It's easy? What else? Did you ever play King of the Mountain when you were a little kid? What do? You try to get up on top of the hill. Everybody comes up, you knock them down. He's at the point where they don't even come up anymore. Everything's going wonderfully. If we were to refer to, notice I began with if, and I still am, if we were to refer to Fortune's wheel, which the Germanic peoples did not know, but the ancient Greeks did, the Romans did, we'll see it a little later in Sir Down of the Green Knight. Where is he on Fortune's wheel? Fortune's wheel always turns. Each of us, our lives are guided by fortune. He's up here. And it's like the wheel has stopped turning. Everything is just wonderful for this person. At last, his portion of pride within him grows and flourishes. Notice, Hrothgar is saying, everybody has a portion of pride. His grows. It blossoms. It becomes more than it should. While the guardian sleeps, the soul's shepherd. What's the soul's shepherd? What is the shepherd? The king, the protector of the soul. It's a word that the Anglo-Saxons did not have. Conscience. Think of what conscience literally means. Co, or with, knowledge. Knowledge with what? That's the interesting thing about that word. With feeling, with emotion, with some other kind of faculty. Okay? The guardian sleeps, the soul shepherd. That sleep is too sound, bound with cares. It's like everything is going so well for him. His conscience, the thing that says, maybe you shouldn't. How does Bugs Bunny, Warner Brothers, portray the conscience? Angel on one shoulder, demon on the other, and they're going back and forth. Notice what's between. Okay? The slayer too close, who's sinful and wicked, shoots from his bow, and you've got a footnote. The slayer is sin or vice, the soul's guardian is reason, conscience, or prudence. Okay? So, sin or vice shoots from his bow, then he is struck in his heart under his helmet with a bitter dart. Wait. Helmet protects what? The head. He's struck in his heart. The heart isn't located in the head. Not according to any physiognomy, any physiology. The heart is in the breast or in the chest. This is probably, some of us think, another biblical allusion. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, where in the 6th chapter, I think, he talks about putting on the full armor of God. Why? You put on the breastplate of righteousness. The breastplate is what? It is a helm. It is a protector of the chase. For what, of the chest, for what purpose do you put that on? So that it will repel the fiery or bitter arrows shot by the evil one. Shoots from his bow, he struck in his heart under his helmet with a bitter dart. The word that is bitter can also be translated fiery. This is talking about temptation and sin getting in when the conscience is asleep. Not literally sleep, meaning not aware, not watchful. He knows no defense. Why? Because everything's been going great for him. The strange dark demands of evil spirits, what he has long held, seems too little. He knows no defense. Against what? The bitter dart. What does the bitter dart deliver? Think of it as a tranquilizer dart. It delivers the strange, dark demands of evil spirits. What are the demands? I don't have enough. What he has long held seems too little. I want more. Angry and greedy, he gives no golden rings for vaunting boasts, like Hermod. And his final destiny he neglects and forgets, since God, ruler of glories, has given him a portion of honors. In other words, he doesn't think about death. He doesn't think he will ever die. In the end, it finally comes about, right? And we saw this in The Wanderer, that the Lana, the lone life-dwelling, that is the body, boy do I identify with this, starts to decay and falls fated to die. Hopefully not next week, but who knows. Another follows him who doles out his riches without regret. Who's the one who follows him? Germanic fashion, the sun. Where did we hear something like this earlier? The prologue. Okay? Scyld had a son named Beowulf, and he did what? He dispensed of the treasure in his father's bosom, just as a man should, so that in his old age, those warriors will stick by him when trouble comes. So, this guy dies, and the one after him deals out the treasure. Defend yourself from wickedness, dear Beowulf. That is, the little story I've told, it's a parable. It's an exemplum. Don't be like him. Best of men, and choose better. There's that comparative again. Eternal counsel. Okay. Germanic mythology, Germanic pagan religion, there is no eternal counsel. There is, and the word there, if I remember right, is rad. Eternal rad. Rad. Advice, eternal counsel, eternal wisdom. Care not for pride. Great champion. You've killed 2 horrendous monsters. Don't let it go to your head. Then he says, the glory of your might is but a little while. Too soon it will be that sickness or the sword will shatter your strength, or the grip of fire, or the surging flood, or the cut of a sword, or the flight of a spear, or terrible old age. What's his point by listing all these different, sometimes the same, modes of death? You too will die. Or the light of your eyes will fail and flicker out. You'll just linger. In one fell swoop, death, O warrior, will overwhelm you. That is when you kind of least expect it. Thus. What's thus mean? Therefore, in this way, like that, 100 half years I held the Ringdanes under the skies and kept them safe from war from many tribes throughout this middle earth, from spears and swords, so that I considered none under the expanse of heaven my enemy. Turnabout came in my own homeland. What story was Hrothgar just telling? That's not a unanimous, I don't even think that's a majority held belief among Beowulf scholars. Hrothgar, I think, and there are quite a few, think the same. Hrothgar is talking about himself. He just said, Beowulf, I've seen your resume. Here's mine. Guess what? Yours can become just like mine if you're not careful. He's saying, look at me, learn from my mistakes. Turnabout came in my own homeland, grief after gladness, when Grendel became my invader, ancient adversary. For that persecution I bore perpetually the greatest heart cares. Thanks be to the Creator, the eternal Lord. I've lived long enough to see that head. Why? Now I know Grendel's dead. What else does he know? If he can bring back Grendel's head, what else must be true? Mama's dead too. Okay? Why the homily? Notice what he says, turnabout. I had written up here, first or second day we started talking about Beowulf, when done. To change, to turn. Lines 175 to 188 are all about changing, turning, expecting comfort, expecting solace. For 12 years, he didn't expect any of those. Beowulf comes and he says, hey, you know what? God can do anything. He never asks, why didn't he? Have we just been given the reason? Godus ira bear. He bore God's anger. Was Grendel a scourge sent by God? Not many scholars read it that way. I do. Grendel's like Nebuchadnezzar. Grendel's like the Philistines. Grendel's like every enemy of the Jews in the Old Testament. Why? Because they did exactly what Hrothgar does. They get fat, dumb, and happy, and they lose their focus. They stop watching, being aware, being thankful. Okay? And God has to do what? Whack, whack, whack. Slap them upside the head. Slap them into awareness or consciousness. So, he says, go to your seat, enjoy the feast. I'm going to get you all kinds of treasure when the morning comes. All right? Beowulf goes and sits down. Everybody's happy. Okay? Beowulf gives Hrunting back to Unferth. Everything's fine with them. He thanks him for the loan. He regarded it as a good war friend. We're told at the bottom of that page, etc., etc. Next morning, Beowulf says, we want to leave. Time for us to go. He says, thank you for the affection. If, 1822, ever on earth I can do anything to earn more of your affection than the battle deeds I've done already, I'll be ready at once. If I ever hear you have problems, skipping a bit, he says, I'll bring you 1,000 things. Notice, he doesn't say I'll send, I'll bring. That is, I'll be at the head of 1,000 things. And he says, Helak, though he's young, shepherd of his people, he'll support me. See, that's an odd phrase. Helak, though he be young, kind of implies what? Is Beowulf suggesting he's older? Is he suggesting he's similar in age? We're not told how old Helak is. We're not told how many years pass between the birth of Heribald Halfkin Helek, an unnamed sister. Okay? I mean, conceivably, Helek could be born about the same time as Beowulf, conceivably. He says, though he be young, he'll support me. 1836. If ever Hrothgar, son of a prince, decides to come to the Geatish court, he'll find friends there. What's the implication of that speech? Is that just, come to the capital. We'll show them the town. Hrothgar, Hrothmund, Beowulf, Hrothgar, Wealhtheow's hovering around, Hrothulf, Unferth.
If ever or/when Hrothulf decides he's going to fight you, if Hrothgar comes, I will be his friend.
Yeah. If Hrothgar ever comes seeking aid, he'll get it. Hrothgar says, the wise lord sent those words. Thank you. Never heard a shrewder speech from such a young man. That implies what? Beowulf's young. Of course, how old is Hrothgar? He ruled for 50 years. Grendel came for 12, 62. Probably became king sometime between 20 and 30, 82 to 92. Such a young man. I look at people I know in their 40s and I say, oh, to be young again. I look at people in their 50s, oh, to be such a young man from, if you're 92, can mean, boy, he's got a lot of wisdom at 55, 65. We don't know. Okay? And then Hrothgar kind of goes on and says, if Helek ever dies, not if, when Helek dies, I think your people will choose you as king. And then Hrothgar tells us something we haven't known before. 1855. You have brought it about that between our peoples, the Geatish nation and the Spear Danes, there shall be peace, and strife shall rest. The malicious deeds they endured before, as long as I shall rule this. Wait. Before Beowulf arrived, the Geats and the Danes, they weren't in open war. They had a cold war. There was strife. There was conflict. What does Beowulf do? He brings peace between them. Kind of like, possibly, Wealhtheow brings peace between her people and Hrothgar's people in the marriage. Hildebert, it didn't quite work, but supposedly brought peace between the Frisians and the Scyldings through her marriage. Okay? So then he orders more treasure brought in. And Beowulf and his men go to their boat. Beowulf gives the Coast Guard a sword. We're told it's a mighty heirloom, so that when that guy goes back to the hall and sits in at the hall, everybody goes, ooh, can I see? Can I see that mighty heirloom? Okay. They get on their boat. They sail back to the land of the Geats. We get introduced to Helek's wife, Hygd. Okay. Bottom of page 110, lines 1925 and following. And we get a story that is very enigmatic. No one really knows exactly what to make of the story of, I don't even remember how he does it, Thrith. In some editions and translations, her name is Modthrith. You got a footnote down there. These lines are difficult. Some editions and translations read the name as Modthrith. The reading adopted here smooths out the transition that is otherwise abrupt even by the standards of this poem. In other words, your guess is as good as mine. Okay? The story is about a woman who is difficult for her father to marry off.
That's putting it lightly.
Sound like any other story in English literature? Shakespeare?
Oh, Taming of the Shrew.
Taming of the Shrew. This is Kate, in one sense. You said I'm putting it lightly. How am I putting it lightly?
Well, doesn't it say, like, she, like, takes up a sword and fights these men? Like, that's not...
She kills them, okay? She's difficult to marry off when they don't keep living, okay? Until this guy named Offa is the suitor, and he tames her, okay? Because of the mention of the name Offa, there were two major Offas, guys by that name. One of them was, I don't remember if your footnote mentions it. Yeah, 4th century king of the continental Angles. That is, on the continent, the area of northern Germany where the Angles ruled, there was an Offa who was king there, okay? But then also there was an Offa who was king in the 8th century of Mercia, one of the largest areas of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. You can still go to England today, go on a walking tour, go from England to Wales, and you will cross over what's called Offa's Dyke. Because Offa built a big old massive earthen wall separating his kingdom from the mad, crazy Welsh. Dug a trench, the earth from the trench made a big old hill, and it's still there, all the way, okay? So some scholars read the poem, and this mention of Offa is having been composed during Offa's lifetime. And that this is a sop, a morsel to be thrown to him to kind of please his pride, all right? So, we're going to skip the rest of that. Beowulf and his men get back to Helac. In 1981, the daughter of Harith, Hygd, okay, passes through the hall, and she does what? Just like Wealhtheow, she bears the cup. Why? This is a queenly duty, okay? So, Helac asks Beowulf a question. 1987. How did you fare, beloved Beowulf, in your journey when you suddenly resolved to seek afar off strife over the salt sea? Notice, you sought out a problem. Did you better at all the well-known woe of Hrothgar? For that I seethed with heart care and distress, mistrusted the adventure. Beowulf said, I was encouraged to go. Helac says, I was really worried and concerned. Did he only become worried and concerned after Beowulf left? I implored that you not seek that slaughter spirit at all. Somebody's lying. Okay? So he says, you should have let the Danes take care of the problem themselves. And say, thanks to God that you're safe. Beowulf, it's no mystery to many men, my lord Helac, the great meeting, what a great time of great struggle. Well, it might be a mystery to Helac because it just happened a couple days ago. So, he recounts the stories, okay? Talks about Wealhtheow, etc., and then he tells us something happened that we didn't see happen. He talks about Hrothgar's daughter. Daughter was never mentioned. She, 2025, the daughter, go back, 2022, Freywaru, heard that's what they called her, when the studded treasure cup was passed among men, she is promised young gold adorned to the gracious son of Froda. That is, she's promised to ENGL, king of or prince of the Heathobards. The ruler of the Scyldings has arranged this, a kingdom shepherd. He approves the council that she might settle this share of feud and slaughter. He might settle this share of feud and slaughter with this young woman. In other words, the Heathobards and the Danes are in conflict. You get a recurring image? The Germanic tribes don't get along. They don't play nicely together. Okay? But seldom, Beowulf now adds, anywhere does the spear rest for even a while, brief while, though the bride be good. He's saying, this isn't a successful means to establish permanent peace. And he tells a story. It may perhaps displease. So what does Beowulf do? He tells this little story, but what kind of story is it? What is it really? It's kind of a prophetic foretelling. Beowulf saying, here's what I think is going to happen. And what's the story he tells? There is a reason why we heard the Lay of Finnsburg, the Finnsburg story. She's going to get married. She's going to go live with ENGL. She's going to bring her troops, her personal retinue with her. Her troops will be men who some of whom may have fought against the Heathobards, but at least one of whom's father fought against them. Okay? And this kid, is what I'm going to call him, this young warrior, is going to be wearing armor and have a sword that belonged to a Heathobard. His father killed that Heathobard, brought the warrior's arms and armor back, and Hrothgar said, well done, thou good and faithful servant, you get to keep the arms and armor. So now this guy is decked out in the armor of some dead Heathobard. And they're going to be sitting there at table, and what's going to happen? The guy's going to strut like a peacock, wearing this stuff, and some old, grizzled, Heathobardish warrior is going to be sitting off to the side next to a young Heathobard warrior, and he's going to go, look at that. Did you see him? Do you know what he's wearing? That's your daddy's armor. Get him. You got to let him do that? He's rubbing your face in it. And that's going to go on for a little while until one morning, the young Heathobard warrior does what? Duty to avenge one's kin or king. He's going to avenge his daddy's death. How? Not against the guy who killed his daddy, against his son. What's going to happen? Strife will be renewed. We saw nearly the same thing described in the Finnsburg passage. Okay? So, we will pick up on Tuesday and attempt to finish. We'll finish it no matter what. I'll send a video to finish it. With around line 2069. And we'll go from there. I'll probably just have to skip a bunch because I do want to talk about the end of the poem.